Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Dr. C.B. Bhattacharya to the show. Dr. C.B. is the H.J. Zoffer Chair in Sustainability and Ethics at the Katz Graduate School of Business at the University of Pittsburgh. He is a world-renowned expert in business strategy innovation aimed at increasing both business and social value. Dr. CB is also an author, and his most recent book is titled Small Actions, Big Difference. Dr. CB, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Raj. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. Dr. CB, I like to start the show off with something interesting about my guest that many people wouldn't know about them. So please, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, before my career as an academic, I started as a brand manager back in the day in India, right after my MBA from the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, which is a well-known school back there. And my first job was with a company called Reckitt Benckiser. It used to be called Reckitt and Coleman at the time, but now it's called Reckitt Benckiser. And my first job task with the company, if you will, was to launch a brand of toilet cleaner in the Indian market. Now, you can have aspirations and aspirations, but I don't think anyone got up in the morning and said, well, I'm really looking forward to doing this job of launching a brand of toilet cleaner. But I said to myself, well, no place to go but up from here. And, it was a fascinating experience because India, this is the mid 1980s I'm talking about, and India is being a labor surplus country. We always had janitors who would kind of come and clean the toilets in houses and apartments and so on. So the idea of a household spending, 3 or 4 times as much money on a toilet cleaner, which is, a fancy blue colored liquid that I had to kind of, bring into the market, was a difficult proposition. So that was the brand called Harpic, and iHeart launched Harpic in the mid 1980s. And I'm happy to say that it's the largest selling toilet cleaner by far in the Indian market today. So that's something I'm pretty proud of.
So that is fascinating. So tell me then, what did motivate you to go to work to, pursue that at that time?
Well, it was in those days, consumer product companies were kind of what, the investment banks or technology companies are today. Kind of, they were the blue chip companies people wanted to work with. And that was my interest for sure, was in consumer products. And so I was happy to get the job. After that, it was, the company's prerogative to give me whatever product they wanted to give me to launch. And, typically when you are a rookie and kind of young in the chain, then you get kind of the, something that is low on the priority list. They wouldn't entrust you with a large seller at the time. So, all right, you figure out the marketing strategy for this, and let's go to market. And I was very lucky that, I had a vice president of marketing who was quite fantastic in his kind of vision and foresight. And he encouraged me to try to understand consumer psychology by conducting focus groups myself and so on and so forth. So that was the time when I realized that kind of I might want to do a PhD because I really do enjoy kind of, learning about consumer psychology and how human beings behave. So you might say that was like the first time or one of the early times that the seed of going for higher education was kind of planted in my mind.
So let's tee off of that consumer psychology, fast forward 30 plus years to your most recent endeavor, your book. Can you give some brief background into your book, please?
Yeah, so my research in corporate responsibility was actually sparked by my interest in social issues, as a result of which I was doing student projects with nonprofits and social causes and so on and so forth. And I got asked an interesting question one evening by Mr. Ben Cohen, who was the CEO of Ben and Jerry's. So the Ben of Ben and Jerry's. He
Wow.
asked me an interesting question, which was like, hey, we do a lot of things for the environment and we do a lot of things for society. So, we support the rainforest and the environment. We pay our workers a living wage rather than a minimum wage. So we do all these things for society. So can you help me understand if what we do for the environment and for society, does it help us sell ice cream? Do people buy Ben and Jerry's because of our environmental and social performance, all else equal? And I found that to be a very fascinating question. I said, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to kind of think about this because as marketing people, we were always thinking about sales
Hmm.
as an outcome, but we were not thinking about environmental attributes and social attributes as drivers of sales. You know what I mean? We were always thinking
I do.
about product quality, price, advertising, all of these, yeah, were the drivers of sales. But environmental and social attributes, no, we were not thinking about that at all. So I thought, okay, maybe there's something interesting to think about here. And I started doing research on the topic, and lo and behold, it was like peeling an onion
Hmm.
to understand kind of under what conditions do stakeholders kind of reward companies for their social responsibility. And that became a body of work on its own. And as I was doing this work and working with companies like Procter and Gamble, like General Mills, Timberland, and others, I came to one observation, which is that the CSR manager of these companies, or the sustainability managers of these companies, were very fine people, but they were also very lonely. So they did not really have a seat at the proverbial strategic table of the company. And
Hmm.
here it was that my research revealed that the only way to maximize kind of the leverage that you get from doing your CSR activities and your sustainability activities, kind of from stakeholders, is to be strategic. Mere engagement doesn't help. You have to be strategic. So the purpose is kind of defeated, and the whole asset is being under leveraged. And that's when I thought, okay, I mean, how do we kind of showcase to companies that it's best to sustainability is best thought of as being in the center of the organization and not in the periphery. And it ought to be everybody's job in the organization, because in the meantime, I was doing a lot of executive education, and executives were always telling me, yes, this is important, sustainability is important, but it's someone else's problem. I have more
Hmm.
important things to do. So we have a department, they'll take care of that. And I found this kind of refrain, constant refrain, kind of frustrating, because I realized that given the state of the planet and its people, if sustainability is relegated to one department of the organization, there is no way that we can surmount this existential crisis that kind of besets us right now. So that's what I wanted to make a difference to. I wanted to understand, again, using that lens of human psychology, what does it take to get an entire organization to kind of mobilize behind this sustainability movement, so that it's not someone else's problem anymore, so that every individual kind of in an organization kind of takes responsibility, takes ownership for sustainability. So if you glance through the book, you will see that this concept of psychological ownership of sustainability is kind of a central theme that kind of runs through kind of all the chapters. But
So
that in
what?
short was the motivation. Sorry.
So what year was the conversation with Ben?
This was circa 1995 is what I want to say.
So 1995. We're in 2019 today, as of this recording. How have you seen the conversation or landscape change in the companies that you're speaking with?
It's changed dramatically in many ways. I mean, so when I started in doing research in this company, companies were doing social and environmental initiatives, but most of them were not strategic about it. So, which is to say that they did not necessarily think about kind of, behind what cause are we spending our money, and who's the target audience, and what kind of industry do we operate in, all the kinds of things that my research had unveiled. as critical in kind of driving stakeholder responses. Um, but if you think beyond that, the major shift that happened in our business landscape is the talk of climate change, is the talk of
Mm-hmm.
inequality, the social issues and the environmental issues suddenly started taking much more center stage, and corporate responsibility got usurped by this concept called sustainability. And in many companies' minds, sustainability is corporate responsibility 2.0, but that's the first myth that I like to dispel, because
Okay.
it's not. Sustainability is about survival. It's really, by definition, it's about survival. It's about long-term health. And when you think about the long-term health of the company, that's involves all parts of the company. It does not involve just one department. It involves procurement, consumption, manufacturing, disposal, kind of, every aspect of the organization. It touches HR, it touches investor relations, and on it goes. And so this is fundamentally different from the idea of being socially responsible, which can be driven by one part of the organization, which does not have to necessarily permeate all aspects of the company. So this fundamental difference, and as well, sustainability goes to the philosophy of the company, which is why there's a chapter in my book on corporate purpose. Kind of, the whole journey
Mm-hmm.
starts with asking that all important question of why do we do what we do? And unless a company has been able to answer that question to satisfaction, and to put that in societal terms, because by now you should have realized that we don't do what we do for the sake of money. There has to be a social mission, like people like Larry Fink even have pointed that out. So all of these things go to suggest that sustainability has to be thought of in a different light than corporate social responsibility. So I would say, so those are some of the fundamental shifts that have taken place in the 20 plus years in the interim.
So let's say, for example, you're speaking to a leadership team at a company, and the executives tell you, look, Dr. CB, we love your work and we appreciate what you're doing. We're having a hard time with the rank and file who are pushing back because they're driven to do production and they're driven by other demands, and they're pushing back and saying, how do we message this to our rank and file to make it seem like this is something that we are prioritizing? What advice would you give to those leadership teams?
Yeah, that's a great question, Raj. I mean, the first thing would be to go back and kind of, define corporate purpose for that particular company. I mean, as soon as it is so, the narrative is changed, kind of, from, let's say, just take one example, from selling soap, in the
Mm-hmm.
context of a company like Unilever, for example, as when the narrative is changed from selling soap to kind of saving lives, kind of, they have an antibacterial soap you may have heard of by the name of Lifebuoy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a large seller in emerging markets. Now, Lifebuoy, of course, um, when you sell soap, you sell Lifebuoy, but it also helps save lives. It attacks the cause of child mortality. So when the idea by the philosophy behind kind of developing and selling Lifebuoy is communicated as kind of, okay, it's not just about selling soap, but ultimately it's about saving these lives that we can by hand washing. That has a very different impression upon the employee, and the employee might be doing the same thing on the production line,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a different energy that comes, and this is something that I've seen firsthand, because people want to be remembered having done something meaningful for society. You mentioned the rank and file. The rank and file are the last people who are actually thinking about profit, because they don't really benefit that much from profit, but they benefit much more from meaning attributed to their jobs. Why do they do what they do? Beyond making ends meet. Of course, they're trying to make ends meet and put food on the table, send their children to school, all of that. But on
Mm-hmm.
top, if there is that other sense that what I am doing, for the 10, 12 hours every day is actually benefiting some segment of society, live a better life in some way, that's a far more powerful message to take home and get a good night's sleep, then what we do is only about making more money, because the rank and file person does not necessarily see the fruits of kind of that kind of labor. So the
Right.
communicating purpose definitely helps. The other thing is to enable. So motivation is not the only part. There's ability is an equally important kind of part of the equation. So you have to invest in training your employees and give them the skills that they need to operate sustainably. So everything is not, as easy as putting off lights, for example, or printing two-sided. Sustainability has many kind of scientific aspects to it. You do eco-efficiency analysis, you do materiality analysis, and these things need to be learned by the individuals, who have to execute sustainability and R&D, kind of from new materials. You get the idea. So it's not just the talk is not enough. I mean, you have to kind of instill management systems, support practices, training, coaching, all of this stuff to kind of bring people up to speed so that they're able to integrate sustainability into their day job. Once the costs of integration are low and the benefits of integration are high, you will see that switch taking place within organizations. I've seen it happen.
The training piece is so important. And, I read this little snippet one time where CFO asked the CEO, we're spending all this money to train these individuals. What if after we train them, they leave? And I love the CEO
Yeah,
responses that,
right.
what if they stay?
Yeah, what if we don't trend them and they stay?
Right, exactly. So
Right. Yeah.
totally agree with you there. A couple of times you've mentioned purpose and meaning and why. In the vein of that, I kind of like to explore, the Simon Sinek, the why behind people do what they're doing. So, what gives you your why and your meaning, your purpose to, pursue this for all these years?
Well, it's about kind of again finding that particular meaning. I mean, I don't know what kind of astrological configuration of stars kind of dragged me into academia, and then what constellation made me change my topic from kind of analyzing scanner data, which is what I did for my dissertation, kind of statistically modeling supermarket scanner data that used to be big data at the time,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of thinking about how do you kind of get organizations to transition to sustainable business models. It's just like the idea of being able to do what you can do, and I've I enjoy doing this kind of research. I enjoy talking to companies. I like kind of making a difference. That talking to companies. This part may have come from my brand management days. You don't know what aspect kind of what influences you and how that shapes your future and so on and so forth. But to me, it's extremely important, being a professor of management. It's extremely important to make a difference to practitioners and how practitioners operate. And if you think about that, just that part, I found the whole idea of making more money and obliterating ourselves to be a fairly silly game, honestly. I like this other game that it's a longer game, and that I only see kind of upside to working on this, to working on these issues. And I find that students, which is another important constituent of my work, students really need this education, and I'm very happy to be one of those who are out there right now being able to provide it for them. So all told, I mean, I'm a big believer in this aspect of working in your spheres of influence. Each of us can only work in our sphere of influence. So you are doing this podcast with me today, and you're going to send that out to the world. That's your sphere of influence. I mean, I can describe my work in Small Actions, Big Difference, the name of my book. And, maybe that model that I proposed in the book is going to be helpful to some folks. And that's in my sphere of influence. So I believe that if all of us work in our spheres of influence, then the collective impact can be great. And that's what motivates me on a daily basis.
You mentioned your model. Can you explain your model?
Yeah. So the model basically has three phases, and the three phases are called incubate, launch, and entrench. And in the incubation phase, what we have to do is the leadership of the organization has to define the corporate purpose. As I said, why do we do what we do? And then define the priorities of the company, some concrete goals. I mean, this is very, very important. And remember that the whole purpose of the model is to enable your employees to take ownership of sustainability. That's the psychological construct that we are after, that we have to build the sense of ownership so that everybody accepts responsibility on their own, and they conduct business through the lens of sustainability. So that's the backdrop. Now, with that backdrop, what really helps is to have this sense of purpose, which leadership needs to define. And leadership needs to define some concrete goals that the organization is going to tackle. So carbon may not be important for a financial services company, but cybersecurity may be important. So you need to do what's called a materiality analysis to figure out, okay, what are the 2 or 3 key issues for my organization to tackle? Once you've done that, armed with a purpose and some concrete goals, you're ready to launch your program through the company and beyond. I mean, and the launch phase has kind of, two aspects to it. One, the first aspect I call entice, and this is where you get everybody to jump aboard that ship, sustainability, the good ship sustainability, by making appeals to the head, kind of, hey, this is a smart thing to do, or making appeals to the heart, hey, this is the right thing to do given the state of our planet. So different strokes for different folks. Take people to the front lines, expose them to the stuff that your company does, all of that. But creating motivation is not enough, like I had said before. So you have to create ability, and that's the enable part. So that's the training, the management systems, all of that, so that every individual is equipped across every department to be able to play the role that he or she is expected to play. So do not make any exceptions in the organization. So once a C-suite officer told me that if you make one exception, then everybody thinks they're the exception.
Right.
So no exceptions. And then once you've launched your program, the third stage is called entrench, which means to make behaving sustainably kind of second nature. You don't have to think about it. And this can be accomplished through 3 steps. One, the first step is I call demystify. So you got to give feedback on the difference that your people are making by working on sustainability. So demystify the progress, which kind of give them the measures, how much difference have they made to CO2 reduction, to water, to waste, to employee engagement, whatever your important KPIs are, kind of keep feeding them the measures of progress. That builds motivation, that builds pride, that builds ownership. The second thing is kind of enliven, and that's enliven this culture of sustainability, keep it fresh in the organization always by doing things like celebrating success, celebrating failure. I've gone to a company called Enel, a very, very large electric utility company based out of Italy. And they have an award ceremony where they celebrate failure. It's called My Best Failure.
That's different.
The thought in the organization being that if you don't fail once in a while, then you're not trying hard enough, and that we've got to learn to talk about our failures. So things like this, so keeping that culture fresh all the time, co-creating sustainability with your employees. And then the last step is expanding that sense of ownership. So it's not just my company, but it's our planet. And therefore, putting sustainability in the pre-competitive space, collaborating with traditional competitors to tackle wicked problems, the tragedy of the commons problems like deforestation, like electronic waste. One company cannot address these mega issues, mega challenges, ending hunger. So we need consortia of companies to come together. So I call that expanding that sense of ownership. But through these steps, kind of, you can build that sense of ownership amongst your employees and your other stakeholders in your ecosystem, so that sustainability is no longer someone else's problem, and then everybody kind of pitches in the company. So that's the gist of the model.
In your third phase, the entrench phase, the first one you started with, demystify, I strongly agree with it. I find a lot of times when, concepts are ephemeral, you can't really, there's no tangibility to them. It's hard to
Hmm.
get people motivated around that. So I think that's such a key in that step. And I think very often, especially amongst executives and leaderships, they convey a message, but they don't really present key tangible results to, like you said, people that are perhaps lower in the organization. Additionally tapping into that why we're doing this and showing them those results. So totally
Right.
agree with that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So your book is called Small Actions, Big Difference. And before I get to my last question, what are some, small actions that we as individuals, organizations can take to participate in this movement?
That's a great question, and that really depends on your place in the perch. I basically argue that it can be from the mailroom to the boardroom. So again, simple actions like, putting lights off, and removing plastic water bottles from our offices, all the way to kind of, thinking about technologies that kind of, potentially can sequester carbon, can reduce the amount of waste that you're generating in your manufacturing processes. So depending on whether you're an engineer, or whether you're a scientist who's doing R&D, to whether you're doing marketing, and therefore you can talk to your customers about how kind of more sustainable your product is relative to others, and tout the benefits of sustainability, to HR, where you can think of investing in developing programs that make every person think and act like a sustainability manager, to investor relations, where you kind of figure out how can I talk to my investors about our sustainability performance, and so that they take notice. That every department and every individual in the organization can play a role. No person is too small enough, and no person is too big enough, and that's how it has to be.
As you were kind of going through the list of individuals, in my mind, I was thinking that HR, who's essentially the gatekeepers for every employee coming on board, if they could find a way to implement a sustainability mission or message as part of the onboarding of employees, I think that would help inculcate them into the sustainable tribe as they moved into the organization.
Yeah, and that many organizations do that. Many organizations, I mean, Unilever would be one example again, but there are others like BASF that have lunches, where employees are invited to come and talk about sustainability. There are organizations where sustainability is a compulsory part of kind of any employee initiation or any employee kind of induction program when they get into the company. I mean, it's absolutely key, and HR has a crucial role in the whole kind of sustainability journey that companies are undertaking. I apologize about that.
No, that's okay. So moving on, you know, from small actions, what advice would you have to the audience? Could you share with the audience?
Do your part. I mean, not doing anything is not an option, right? Today, because of what we are seeing outside, every individual has to kind of step up, whether you are stay at home dad or mom. I mean, you can do your part on the domestic front. If you're working in an organization, you can talk to your colleagues, you can talk to your department folks and say, hey, what are we doing? Are we really leveraging everything we can to be as sustainable as possible? Maybe you are an MBA student, and then you can think of, okay, what kind of life do I want to lead kind of going forward? Should I not kind of, take more classes in sustainability? I feel that each of us, all of us, can be what I call a sustainability generalist. And what that
Mm-hmm.
means is that we do not have to know all the details, all the science behind everything, but rather know what is it that we can do through our own spheres of influence to make, our world a better place. And by world, I don't just mean environmentally, I mean socially as well, because that's another point that's missed by a lot of our audience, is that and sustainability is equated to environmental. But no, I mean, societal welfare is as much a part of its sustainability. And the point is that they're just options for all of us to jump in and do. And these refrains of kind of, oh, it's a too little too late, or what difference can I make by myself? These are precisely wrong. I mean, doing something about it is vaguely right, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and can take us in the right direction. But inaction is precisely wrong at this point.
I love the advice about being a sustainability generalist. And one last thing, I'd be remiss if I don't ask you about the Spotify story. So if you'd love to share, I'd appreciate it.
Oh yeah. So I was in Chile in this Atacama Desert area doing research on the geothermal plant, and we were really high up in the mountains, right? So we were driving at 14,000 feet. The company is this company NL that I mentioned, the electric utility company. They were the ones who were giving me a tour. And we were driving at more than like 14,000 feet. And I'd had to get medical clearance for that trip. So as you can imagine, at those distances, altitudes rather, it's and long distances, it's like the internet is pretty intermittent. And whenever it did come on, so beyond checking email, the other thing to do was to kind of, listen to some music, because the driver had all these Spanish CDs in the car and needed a little bit of a reprieve from them. So it was one such moment, and I was playing a tune from my Spotify account when there was this other song that came on, and it was this Barney song, kind of, I love you, you love me, we are a happy family. And it was like,
Mm-hmm.
blown
The
away.
hypnotic.
How is this song coming on here? I mean, I knew the song because my son Felix, we were listening to it when he was 2 or 3 years old, heard it 1,000 times, but why was it coming here? And then I realized that really was the handiwork of Felix, who was at that time 13 years old. I mean, I'd been away for a while, and so he was missing me, and we shared one Spotify account. So he was clever enough to know how to override my song with his song. So that's exactly what he'd done.
So
And
he
he was
embedded
sending
a
me a
secret
message of
message.
love. He was sending me, he was telling me that he was missing me and so on. And that was a pretty special moment, because, when you cut to the chase, I mean, what's more important than love, and to be able to care for those you love. And if nothing else, I think, companies should as well, kind of every individual should be thinking about their children. And that can be a big drive for us to, in our generation at least, do as much as we can, so they inherit a world that's not too far worse than kind of, what we inherited. So that's the hope.
Well, Dr. CB, I think that's a great place to leave off on love and caring about others and caring about the planet. I sincerely appreciate your time today, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you very much.
I appreciate you.
Thanks.